Look at this napkin. It's stained with cheap coffee and grease, but it's worth $100 million. Everyone thought Sterling Thorne was untouchable, the billionaire CEO of Thorne Dynamics. And everyone thought Eleanor was just a waitress who couldn't even spell portfolio. One rainy night, he laughed in her face, threw a challenge at her to save his dying company, and signed this napkin as a drunken joke. He thought he was mocking her. He didn't know that he had just handed the keys to his empire to the only person dangerous enough to save it, or destroy him completely. This is how a waitress did the impossible. The rain lashed against the plate glass window of Saul's 24-hour diner, blurring the neon lights of downtown Chicago into streaks of red and blue. Inside, the air smelled of stale frying oil and lemon floor cleaner. It was 2:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, the graveyard shift, also known as the shift where dreams went to die. Eleanor Ellie Vance tightened the strings of her stained white apron. Her feet throbbed in her worn-out sneakers. She was 26, but tonight she felt 50. She brushed a strand of chestnut hair out of her eyes and looked at table 4. He was back. Sterling Thorne, the CEO of Thorne Dynamics, a logistics and tech conglomerate that moved half the freight in North America. Usually, men like him were seen on the covers of Forbes or Time, wearing bespoke Italian suits that cost more than Ellie made in a year. But for the last 3 nights, Sterling Thorne had been sitting in her section, wearing the same wrinkled dress shirt, tie loosened, staring at a mountain of documents spread across the Formica table. He looked like a man watching his execution in slow motion. Ellie picked up the coffee pot and walked over. "Top off, Mr. Thorne?" Sterling didn't look up. He was furiously tapping on a tablet, his other hand gripping a whiskey glass he'd smuggled in. "The numbers don't align," he muttered, his voice raspy. "The liquidity forecast is off by 40%. If the board sees this at the meeting on Friday, they'll vote for the merger with Vane Corp. They'll gut the company." "Mr. Thorne?" Ellie asked again, softer this time. Sterling snapped his head up. His eyes were bloodshot, dark circles bruising the skin beneath them. He looked at Ellie with a mixture of annoyance and pure exhaustion. "Coffee," he barked. "Black, and stop hovering. You're blocking the light." Ellie poured the coffee, her hand steady despite his rudeness. She glanced down at the papers. It was a balance sheet projection for the upcoming fiscal quarter, layered with a complex debt restructuring algorithm. She frowned. "You're calculating the variable interest on the wrong amortization schedule," she said quietly. "That's why you're showing a 40% loss. If you switch to a declining balance method, you'll free up the capital you need to block the merger." The silence that followed was deafening. The hum of the refrigerator behind the counter seemed to stop. Sterling slowly lowered his tablet. He looked at the paper, then up at Ellie, then back at the paper. He let out a short, cruel laugh. "Excuse me?" Sterling sneered. "Did the waitress just give me financial advice?" "I'm just saying," Ellie said, clutching the coffee pot tighter. "The math is rigid on that spreadsheet. You're treating liquid assets like fixed inventory." Sterling slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "Listen to me, honey. I have a team of Wharton MBA graduates working on this. I have analysts who charge $1,000 an hour. And you think because you can calculate a 15% tip on a grilled cheese sandwich, you understand corporate debt restructuring?" Ellie bit her lip. She should have stayed quiet. She needed this job. "I was just trying to help." "Help?" Sterling stood up, swaying slightly. The smell of expensive scotch rolled off him. "My company is bleeding out. My stock has dropped 60 points in a week. Marcus Vane is circling like a shark to buy me out for pennies on the dollar. And you," he gestured at her dirty apron, You think you can fix it? He grabbed a napkin from the dispenser and clicked a gold Mont Blanc pen. He scribbled furiously, the pen tearing through the thin paper. Here, he spat, slapping the napkin onto the table. Since you're a genius, you save Thorn Dynamics. You find the leak, you fix the stock price, you stop the hostile takeover, you do the impossible. He leaned in close, his eyes wild. You do that, and I'll give you $100 million. I'll sign over my personal shares. He signed the bottom of the napkin with a flourish. Sterling Thorn. Go ahead, he mocked, tossing a stack of $100 bills on the table for his bill. Take it. Fix my company, Waitress. He grabbed his coat and stormed out of the diner, leaving the door swinging in the wind. Ellie stood frozen. The other few customers were staring. She looked down at the table. The cash was there, an absurd tip, but next to it was the napkin. Save Thorn Dynamics. Reward $100,000. Ellie picked up the napkin. Her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a sudden, cold clarity. Sterling Thorn didn't know who she was. He saw an apron. He didn't see Eleanor Vance, the former prodigy who had entered MIT at 16 and vanished from the academic world at 20 after a scandal that wasn't her fault. He didn't know she saw numbers like other people saw colors. She folded the napkin and put it in her pocket. Check, please, she whispered to the empty room. The next morning, the Thorn Dynamics headquarters in downtown Chicago was a fortress of glass and steel, piercing the gray sky. The lobby was a hive of activity, lawyers shouting into phones, analysts running with binders, and security guards checking IDs with military precision. The atmosphere was toxic. Everyone knew the rumors. The company was tanking. Marcus Vane, the CEO of Vane Corp and Sterling's bitter rival, was expected to announce a hostile takeover within 48 hours. Ellie walked through the revolving doors. She wasn't wearing her apron. She was wearing a sharp, charcoal blazer she'd bought at a thrift store, tailored to fit perfectly, and black slacks. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, professional bun. She carried a battered leather briefcase that had belonged to her father. She walked straight to the security turnstiles. ID, the guard grunted, not looking up. I'm here to see Sterling Thorn, Ellie said, her voice steel. The guard chuckled. Yeah, and I'm here to see the Queen of England. Do you have an appointment? Tell him the waitress from Sal's is here. Tell him I have his napkin. The guard frowned, confused. He reached for his radio to call security to escort her out, but Ellie slapped a piece of paper against the glass partition. It wasn't the napkin. It was a printout. Actually, Ellie said, raising her voice so the receptionist and nearby suits could hear. Tell him I know why his logistics algorithm is bleeding cash. Tell him it's not the market. It's a line of code on the sub-server in Singapore. Someone is siphoning the fuel surcharges. A hush fell over the immediate area. A junior executive stopped in his tracks. Call him, Ellie commanded. 3 minutes later, the elevator doors chimed. A frantic-looking personal assistant, a woman named Sarah with frazzled hair, came running out. You're the woman from the diner? Sarah asked, looking Ellie up and down skeptically. Is he in? He's in a crisis meeting with the board of directors. They're voting to fire him in an hour. Take me up, now. Sarah hesitated, then swiped her badge. The elevator shot up to the 50th floor. When the doors opened, the chaos was palpable. People were shouting. In the glass-walled conference room at the end of the hall, Ellie could see Sterling Thorn standing at the head of a massive table. He looked worse than he had the night before. He was pale, sweating, shouting at a room full of stony-faced men and women in expensive suits. Ellie didn't wait for Sarah. She marched down the hall, pushed past 2 junior associates, and threw open the heavy glass doors of the boardroom. "You can't go in there," Sarah squeaked behind her. The room went silent. 20 heads turned. Sterling Thorne froze mid-sentence, his hand pointing at a graph on the screen. He squinted at Ellie, recognition dawning slowly through his hangover. "You," he breathed. "The waitress?" A heavy-set man with a bald head and a cruel mouth sat to Sterling's right. This was Arthur Penhaligon, the chairman of the board. "Sterling," Penhaligon said, his voice like gravel. "Who is this? Is this another one of your escorts?" "I'm his consultant," Ellie said, dropping her briefcase onto the mahogany table with a heavy thud. She looked at Sterling. "You made a bet, Mr. Thorne. You said if I could fix it, you'd pay up. Well, I looked at your public filings. I ran a regression analysis on your supply chain data between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. this morning." She opened the briefcase and pulled out a single red folder. "You aren't losing money because of bad management, though your attitude certainly doesn't help," Ellie said, walking around the table. She stopped behind the chairman, Arthur Penhaligon. "You're losing money because someone inside this room created a shell company called Apex Logistics and is subcontracting your own shipping routes back to you at a 200% markup." The room erupted in gasps. Sterling stared at her, his mouth slightly open. "What?" "It's buried in the operational expenses under miscellaneous tariffs," Ellie continued. "It's clever. Small enough to be missed in a quarterly review, big enough to drain your liquidity over 2 years so the stock price crashes. Perfect for a hostile takeover." She slid the folder towards Sterling. "The shell company is registered in the Cayman Islands, but the IP address used to authorize the payments? It traces back to a private server." Ellie turned her gaze directly to Arthur Penhaligon. "Yours, Mr. Chairman." The silence in the room was heavier than lead. Penhaligon's face turned a shade of purple. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "This is preposterous. Who is this girl? Security!" Penhaligon roared. Sterling grabbed the folder. He flipped it open. His eyes scanned the data Ellie had compiled. Screenshots of code, bank routing numbers, IP logs. It was undeniable. It was brilliant. Sterling looked up, and for the first time the arrogance was gone from his eyes, replaced by something else, awe and rage. "Sit down, Arthur," Sterling said, his voice dangerously low. "Security isn't coming for her. They're coming for you." Sterling looked at Ellie, the waitress, the girl he had mocked. "You really did it," he whispered. "I'm not done," Ellie said, crossing her arms. "Stopping the bleed saves the company today. But if you want to survive the week and beat Marcus Vane, we have to rebuild the entire stock profile before the market closes on Friday. That's 3 days." She pulled the napkin out of her pocket and slammed it on the table next to the folder. "We have a contract, Mr. Thorne. Do you want to save your company, or do you want me to go back to pouring coffee?" Sterling looked at the napkin, then at his board members who were now looking at him for leadership. He looked at Ellie. He smiled, a sharp, predatory grin returning to his face. "Sarah," Sterling barked at his assistant, "get Ms. Vance an office, the one next to mine, and get her whatever she wants. Coffee, a supercomputer, a masseuse, anything." He looked at Ellie. "You're on the clock, partner. Let's go to war." The transition from Sal's 24-hour diner to the executive suite of Thorne Dynamics was enough to give anyone whiplash. But Ellie didn't have time to be dizzy. She had 72 hours to pull a miracle out of thin air. Arthur Penhaligon had been escorted out of the building by federal agents an hour after the board meeting. The news hit the wire services immediately. Thorne Dynamics chairman investigated for embezzlement. Predictably, the stock didn't go up. It tanked. Uncertainty was the enemy of the market, and now Thorne Dynamics looked like a burning ship without a captain. The share price plummeted to $14.50. If it hit $10, the bank covenants would trigger, the loans would be called in, and the company would be liquidated instantly. Ellie sat in the war room, a high-tech conference center adjoining Sterling's office. It was littered with empty pizza boxes, energy drink cans, and stacks of paper. Sterling was pacing back and forth, phone glued to his ear, screaming at a bank manager in Zurich. "I don't care what the risk assessment says," Sterling roared, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "We just cut the cancer out. We are leaner than we've been in 10 years. Extend the line of credit for 48 hours. Give us a chance to breathe." He slammed the phone down. "They aren't budging. We have until Friday closing bell. If the stock isn't above $25 by then, Vane triggers the automatic buyout clause." Ellie didn't look up from her 3 monitors. Her fingers were flying across the mechanical keyboard, the clicking sound like automatic gunfire in the tense room. "Stop yelling, Sterling," she said calmly. "You're wasting oxygen." Sterling spun around, his eyes blazing. "Excuse me? I'm trying to keep the lights on. And what are you doing? Playing solitaire? We need a PR strategy, not a coda." "PR is a band-aid," Ellie said, finally pausing to look at him. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and tired. "You can't PR your way out of a math problem. Penhaligon wasn't just stealing money. He was sabotaging the routing efficiency to justify the external contracts." She hit a key. A 3D map of North America appeared on the main screen, covered in thousands of red lines. "This is your current fleet movement," Ellie explained, standing up and walking to the screen. "It's a mess. Trucks are driving empty half the time. Ships are waiting in port for cargo that isn't there. It's bleeding $2 million a day in fuel alone." She tapped the keyboard again. The red lines turned green and shifted, creating a streamlined, elegant web. "This," she said, "is the Vance algorithm. I just finished rewriting your entire logistics kernel. It integrates real-time traffic, weather patterns, and fuel prices. If we implement this right now, we slash operating costs by 30% instantly. That increases your projected quarterly profit by $200 million. Sterling stared at the screen. He walked closer, tracing the lines with his eyes. He understood the business better than anyone, despite his reputation as a playboy. He saw the brilliance of it immediately. It was efficient. It was beautiful. "How?" Sterling whispered, turning to look at her. "How did you do this in 4 hours? My IT department has been trying to optimize this for 5 years." Ellie looked down, a shadow crossing her face. "I see patterns. I always have. Numbers make sense to me in a way people don't." Sterling leaned against the heavy oak table, crossing his arms. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by curiosity. "Who are you, really? You're not just a waitress. I had my security team run a background check on Eleanor Vance. It came up clean. Too clean. No college degree, no employment history before the diner. You're a ghost." Ellie stiffened. She walked back to her laptop and closed it. "Does it matter? The algorithm is done. Upload it. Issue a press release stating that Thorn Dynamics has revolutionized its supply chain. The market reacts to innovation. The stock will climb." "It matters to me," Sterling said, his voice softer now. He walked over to her, invading her personal space, but not aggressively. He smelled of expensive cologne and coffee. "I handed a $100 million IOU to a stranger on a napkin. I think I deserve to know who I'm fighting alongside." Ellie looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. The rain was starting again. "My father was Robert Vance," she said quietly. Sterling froze. "Robert Vance? The CFO of Omega Corp? The man who stole the pension funds and vanished 10 years ago?" "He didn't steal them," Ellie said, her voice fierce, her fists clenching at her sides. He was framed. He found a discrepancy in the books, just like I did with Penhaligon. But the people he was working for were smarter, faster, and more ruthless. They planted the evidence on his laptop. They destroyed his reputation in a day. He had a heart attack 2 days before his trial. He died a villain. She turned to face Sterling, tears stinging her eyes, but refusing to fall. I was 16. I was at MIT. I had to drop out to take care of my mother, but the legal fees took everything. The house, the cars, the savings. We were blacklisted. No one would hire a Vance. So I became Ellie the waitress. I hid my brain because every time I used it, I remembered what it cost my father. The room was silent. The hum of the servers was the only sound. Sterling looked at her with a new expression. It wasn't just respect. It was a deep, resonating empathy. He knew what it was like to be judged for a name, though his burden was wealth, not shame. You're doing this for him, Sterling realized. Not for the money. I'm doing it to prove that math doesn't lie, Ellie said. People lie. Numbers are the only justice left. Sterling reached out and, for a brief second, touched her shoulder. Then let's get some justice. Upload the code. Ellie hit enter. Across the country, thousands of GPS units in Thorn trucks beeped with new instructions. The system reset, and on the wall of the war room, the stock ticker flickered. Turn. 14 $50. 15.10. 16.80. It's working, Sarah, the assistant, cheered from the doorway. CNBC just picked up the press release. They're calling it a digital renaissance for the company. Sterling grinned, the first genuine smile Ellie had seen on him. We're not dead yet, partner. But the celebration was premature. The intercom on the desk buzzed. It was the front desk security. The guard's voice was trembling. Mr. Thorne, you have a visitor. He says he has an appointment. I didn't clear any appointments, Sterling snapped. Who is it? It's Marcus Vane, sir. And he's not alone. He has a team of lawyers and reporters. Sterling's smile vanished. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He looked at Ellie. Vane is here, Sterling said, his voice cold. The shark smells blood. Marcus Vane didn't walk. He glided. He was a man of 60, silver-haired, tanned, wearing a navy suit that cost more than the entire diner Ellie worked at. He had the eyes of a reptile, unblinking, devoid of warmth. He entered the boardroom, followed by 3 lawyers, and, shockingly, a camera crew from a major financial news network. Sterling, my boy, Vane said, his voice smooth as velvet. I see you're still rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Sterling stood tall, buttoning his jacket. Get the cameras out of here, Marcus. This is private property. Actually, Vane smiled, as the owner of 30% of your debt, I have a right to inspect the assets I'm about to foreclose on, and the public has a right to know how their economy is being mishandled. Vane's eyes drifted past Sterling and landed on Ellie. He paused. A flicker of recognition sparked in those cold eyes. And who is this? Vane asked, stepping closer. New secretary? Or, wait. He squinted, tilting his head. You look familiar. Ellie stood her ground. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She recognized him. Not from magazines, but from a memory 10 years old. Marcus Vane had been at her house the night before the police raided it. He had been her father's friend. I'm the consultant, Ellie said, her voice steady. And we aren't foreclosing. Our stock is rallying. We just optimized the logistics grid. We're up 12% in the last hour. Vane chuckled softly. Ah, yes. The Vance algorithm, was it? I saw the code specs on the wire. He turned to the camera crew. Turn that on. I want this recorded. The red light on the camera blinked on. Vane turned to Sterling, his face a mask of faux sympathy. Sterling, the rally is cute, but it's temporary. You see, your new algorithm relies on cloud-based processing via the Omni server network to handle that amount of data. So what? Sterling challenged. We have a contract with Omni. You did, Vane corrected. But 20 minutes ago, Vane Corp acquired Omni server network. We are now your service provider. Sterling's face went pale. And, Vane continued, checking his diamond-encrusted watch, I'm afraid we're experiencing a technical outage. We are severing your server access, effective immediately. You can't do that, Ellie shouted, stepping forward. That's antitrust. That's deliberate sabotage. It's a business decision, Vane sneered. We can't support unstable clients. On the big screen behind them, the green lines of the map turned black. Error messages popped up. Connection lost. System failure. The stock ticker, which had been climbing, froze. Then it dropped, like a stone. $16.80. 12 of Sabanos. 9.50. No, Sterling gasped. No, it's over, Sterling, Vane said, placing a thick document on the table. This is the acquisition agreement. Sign it now, and I'll let you keep your penthouse and a token seat on the board. Refuse, and I'll drive this stock to zero by morning. You'll be destitute. And you? He turned to Ellie. I remember you now, Vane said, his voice dropping to a whisper, so only she and Sterling could hear. Little Eleanor Vance. The apple doesn't fall far from the rotting tree. Did you tell Sterling that your father begged me for money before he died? Did you tell him that the code you just wrote is based on proprietary architecture your father stole from me 10 years ago? That's a lie, Ellie screamed. He didn't steal anything. You set him up. Vane laughed. Prove it. Oh, wait, you can't. You're just a waitress with a disgraced name. He turned back to the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears Thorn Dynamics is relying on unverified technology from the daughter of a known felon. This is the desperation of a dying company. Sterling looked at Ellie. For a second, doubt clouded his eyes. Vane was good. He knew exactly where to twist the knife. Sterling, Ellie pleaded, grabbing his arm. Don't sign it. He's bluffing. He's scared. If he wasn't scared of what we did today, he wouldn't be here trying to shut us down. Sterling looked at the contract. Then he looked at the stock price. It was at $8.06. The company was technically insolvent. I have employees, Sterling whispered. Thousands of them. If I don't sign, they lose their pensions. They lose everything. If you sign, he guts the company anyway, Ellie argued. We need time. Give me 12 hours. You don't have 12 hours, Vane boomed. I want a signature now. Sterling picked up the pen. His hand shook. He looked at the napkin from the diner, still sitting on the desk under a paperweight. Save my company and I'll give you 100 metas. He looked at Ellie. She looked small, defeated, but her eyes were burning with a fierce, desperate light. Sterling threw the pen across the room. It bounced off Vane's chest. Get out, Sterling said quietly. Vane's smile vanished. What? I said, get the hell out of my office, Sterling roared, slamming his fist on the table. I don't care if the stock hits zero. I don't care if I have to sell my blood. I am not signing my father's legacy over to a snake like you. He pointed at the camera. And you can broadcast this. Tell the world that Marcus Vane had to buy the internet just to stop a waitress from outsmarting him, because that's what happened. Vane's face turned a dark crimson. He adjusted his cuffs. You've made a grave mistake, boy, Vane hissed. By tomorrow morning, the banks will seize this building. You won't even be able to get into the lobby. He signaled his team. Let's go. We'll buy the scraps at the auction. Vane marched out, the camera crew scrambling behind him. The room fell into a terrifying silence. The screens were black. The stock was dead. Sterling collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "I just killed the company. It's over, Ellie. You did your best." But he cut our throat. Ellie stared at the blank screens. Her mind was racing, moving faster than the algorithms she wrote. Vane had cut the server access. He thought he had blinded them. But Vane had made one mistake. He had mentioned her father. "It's not over," Ellie said, her voice low and dangerous. She walked to her backpack and pulled out an old, thick, hard drive wrapped in bubble wrap. It was scratched and battered. "What is that?" Sterling asked, lifting his head. "Vane said my father stole architecture from him," Ellie said, plugging the drive into the mainframe. "He was lying. My father didn't steal it. He built it, and he kept a backup." She looked at Sterling. "We don't need Vane's servers. We don't need the cloud. We're going to build a peer-to-peer network using the GPS computers inside every single one of your 50,000 trucks. We're going to turn your fleet into a decentralized supercomputer." She cracked her knuckles. "Sterling, order pizza. We're pulling an all-nighter. And if this works, we aren't just going to save the company. We're going to put Marcus Vane in prison." The war room transformed from a corporate strategy center into a high-tech triage unit. It was 3:17 a.m. The air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee, ozone from overheating electronics, and raw, unfiltered panic. Sterling was on his hands and knees under the main console, his expensive Italian suit jacket discarded hours ago, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms smeared with grease. He was splicing a fiber-optic cable with a pocket knife. "Talk to me, Vance!" he yelled over the roar of portable cooling fans they'd dragged in from the hallway. "I'm losing signal on the west trunk." Ellie didn't blink. She was surrounded by 4 monitors, her eyes darting between lines of green code that scrolled faster than a human could read. She was channeling something deep inside her, the same hyperfocus that had gotten her into MIT at 16. "Keep it steady," she commanded, her voice hoarse. "I'm building a bridge between my father's 2010 architecture and your modern GPS transponders. The language protocols don't match. It's like trying to teach ancient Greek to a toddler in 10 seconds. The challenge was immense. Vane had cut the head off the snake by killing the main servers. Ellie's plan was to turn the body, the 50,000 trucks scattered across North America, into a decentralized brain, a mesh network. Each truck would talk to the truck next to it, sharing small packets of data, bypassing the need for a central hub. It was brilliant, it was revolutionary, and it was currently failing. At 4:30 a.m., they hit a wall. The latency was too high. The data packets were getting bottlenecked. Sterling crawled out from under the desk, wiping sweat and grime from his forehead. He looked at the main screen. The simulated network was a mess of red error indicators. "It's not fast enough," Sterling said, his voice flat with exhaustion. "When the market opens at 9:30, the high-frequency trading algorithms will see the lag and dump the stock even harder. We'll be dead in 30 seconds. Ellie stared at the screen, her mind racing. She thought of her father. He had built this code to be robust, not fast. He never anticipated it would need to run a global logistics empire in real time. She closed her eyes. "Think, Ellie. What am I missing?" Her eyes snapped open. "It's the cellular handshake," she whispered. "The what?" "The trucks are trying to verify their position using standard 4G towers before they talk to each other. That's the lag. Vane owns the towers now." She stood up, energized by a sudden, desperate idea. "We need to bypass the towers. We need them to communicate directly via shortwave radio frequencies." Sterling shook his head. Our trucks don't have shortwave transmitters strong enough for that. No, Ellie said, grabbing his shoulders, her eyes intense. But they have CB radios. Every single long-haul trucker in your fleet has a citizen band radio for chatting on the road. Sterling stared at her. You want to run $1 billion logistics data stream through trucker CB radios? That's insane. The bandwidth is microscopic. It's not about bandwidth. It's about the ping, Ellie argued. We use the CBs just for the handshake, the initial hello. Once they connect locally, the GPS units handle the heavy data lifting. She looked at him. It's a Frankenstein network, Sterling. It's ugly, it's jury-rigged, and it's held together with duct tape and prayer. But it's the only thing Vane can't switch off. Sterling looked at the woman who, 24 hours ago, he had insulted over a grilled cheese sandwich. Now, she was proposing the most audacious piece of engineering he'd ever heard of. A grin slowly spread across his tired face. I love it. What do you need? I need access to the audio subsystem of every truck in the fleet. I need to broadcast a digital screech over Channel 19 that will wake up every receiver from here to Seattle. Sterling grabbed a headset. Sarah, he bellowed into the intercom, waking his assistant who was dozing in the outer office. Wake up the fleet managers. Tell them to tell every driver to turn their CBs on and keep the channel clear. We're about to make some noise. Dawn broke over Chicago, not with sunlight, but with a sickly grey pallor. It was 6:45 a.m. Inside the war room, the atmosphere had shifted from frantic creation to agonizing waiting. The CB patch was written. The code was loaded into the injection chamber. They were ready to push the button that would either save them or fry the electrical systems of 50,000 vehicles. But Marcus Vane wasn't sleeping. Across the street, in the penthouse suite of the Vane Corp Tower, Marcus Vane lowered his high-powered binoculars. He had watched the lights burn all night on the 50th floor of Thorn Dynamics. He had seen the thermal spikes, indicating massive server activity, even though he had cut their connection. They're up to something, Vane murmured to his chief legal counsel. That waitress. She's using her father's old tricks. He checked his watch. 7 a.m. The foreclosure paperwork wasn't effective until 9 a.m. Technically, Thorn still owned the building. Do it, Vane commanded softly. Send in the asset protection team. Tell them we have reason to believe the current occupants are destroying corporate property prior to handover. I want that server room locked down before the markets open. Marcus, the lawyer nervously adjusted his glasses. That's highly illegal. That's breaking and entering. Vane turned his reptile eyes on the lawyer. It's only illegal if you lose. And I never lose. Back on the 50th floor, the elevators suddenly chimed. Not the main bank, but the freight elevator at the back of the hallway. Sterling, who had been pacing nervously, froze. Who's using the freight car? Security is cleared out. A heavy thud echoed down the marble corridor. Then another. Footsteps, heavy boots, not the polite clip-clop of corporate loafers. Sarah burst into the war room, her face pale with terror. Mr. Thorne, there are men in the hallway, 6 of them. They're wearing tactical gear. They pushed past the night watchman. Sterling cursed under his breath. He looked at the digital clock on the wall. 7:15 a.m. 45. He looked at Ellie, whose finger was hovering over the execute key. How long does the upload take? Sterling asked urgently. If the CB patch works, 45 minutes for total saturation across the continent, Ellie said. If it doesn't work, eternity. Start it. Now, Sterling ordered. Ellie pressed the key. A progress bar appeared on the main screen. Upload initiated, 0.01%. It was agonizingly slow. Sterling walked to the heavy oak doors of the war room. He locked the deadbolt. He grabbed a heavy decorative crystal award from a shelf, CEO of the Year, 2023, and hefted it like a brick. "Sarah, get under the desk," Sterling said calmly. He turned to Ellie. "Whatever you hear, whatever happens at this door, you do not stop typing. Do you understand me? You hold that line." Ellie looked up from the screen. For a moment, their eyes met. The billionaire playboy was gone. In his place was a man ready to physically fight for what he built. "Buy me time," Ellie whispered. A fist hammered against the door. It was a sound of pure violence. "Open up! Asset protection!" A deep voice boomed from outside. "We're busy!" Sterling shouted back. "Come back at 9!" The response was a sickening crack as something heavy rammed into the wood. The doorframe splintered. Sterling braced his shoulder against the door, his feet digging into the plush carpet. Another slam. The wood groaned. On the screen behind him, the numbers ticked up slowly. Upload. 12%. 15%. "Faster," Ellie pleaded to the machine, her hands flying across the keyboard, optimizing data packets on the fly, trying to grease the digital wheels. Outside, the attackers grew frustrated. "Blow the hinges," someone commanded. A muffled explosion rocked the room. Smoke billowed in from the edges of the door. The top hinge sheared off with the sound of a gunshot. The door hung precariously at an angle. Through the gap, a black-gloved hand reached in to try and unlock the deadbolt. Sterling didn't hesitate. He smashed the crystal award down onto the hand with all his strength. A howl of pain echoed from the hallway, and the hand jerked back. Sterling threw his full weight against the broken door, wedging it shut again. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with the grime. "Ellie!" he roared. "Status!" 38%! She screamed back, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. "The Midwest cluster is lagging due to storms." The pounding stopped for a moment. A chilling silence fell. "They're regrouping," Sterling panted. Then the lights went out. The hum of the cooling fans died. The overhead fluorescents winked out. The room plunged into grey morning twilight. "They cut the power at the mains," Sterling groaned, but the monitors flickered and stayed on. Ellie had insisted they plug the core systems into uninterruptible power supplies, UPS. Big battery backups. "We're on battery," Ellie yelled. "But the router, the main building router that sends the signal out, it's not on a backup." The upload bar froze. Upload paused. 41%. Connection lost. It was over. They had the brain, they had the code, but the throat was cut. Sterling slumped against the door. The fight drained out of him. He heard the men outside laughing. Ellie stared at the frozen screen in horror. She failed. She failed Sterling. She failed her father. Then her eyes landed on Sterling. He was leaning against the door, exhausted. In his hand, he was clutching his smartphone, its screen glowing in the dark room. Ellie's mind, pushed beyond the brink of exhaustion, made one final desperate leap of logic. "Sterling," she said, her voice strangely calm in the silence. "Your car, the Aston Martin in the executive garage downstairs." Sterling looked at her, confused. "What about it?" "Vane will own it in an hour." "Does it have a high-speed satellite uplink for the infotainment system?" "Yes. It cost 50 grand extra." "Why?" Ellie stood up. She grabbed a USB cable and ran toward him. "Plug your phone into my laptop," she ordered, "and open your car app. Ellie, what are you— Do it! We can't send the data out through the building. But if your phone can connect to your car's Bluetooth downstairs, we can use the car's satellite dish as a bridge. We can bounce the signal off space." Sterling stared at her. It was the most desperate, ridiculously fragile plan yet. Outside, a voice shouted, "On 3, 1, 2." Sterling jammed the cable into his phone. He opened the app. It searched for a signal, searching for Aston Martin, DB11. The door slammed again. Sterling grunted as the impact shuddered through his body. Connected. Go! Sterling yelled. Ellie hit resume upload. The bar flickered. Connecting via external bridge. Then it moved. 42%. 45%. Outside the door, the men were preparing for the final breach. Inside, a waitress and a CEO huddled over a laptop, watching a progress bar creep forward, praying that a luxury car 200 feet below them didn't lose its Bluetooth connection. The clock on the wall ticked over to 8:45 a.m. 45 minutes until the opening bell. 45 minutes until oblivion. The heavy oak door finally gave way with a deafening crash of splintering wood. Sterling was thrown back by the impact, landing hard on the carpet. 3 men in tactical gear stormed into the darkened war room, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. They didn't look like security guards. They moved like mercenaries. "Hands where I can see them!" The lead intruder screamed, leveling a taser at Sterling. "Don't touch the laptop!" Sterling shouted, scrambling to his feet, blocking their path to Ellie. Ellie was hunched over the desk, her face illuminated by the pale glow of the screen. The progress bar was agonizingly close. 98%. One of the men shoved Sterling aside, pinning him against the wall. The leader marched toward Ellie. He didn't ask her to move. He simply swept his arm across the desk, knocking the laptop, the backup drives, and Sterling's phone onto the floor. The connection severed instantly. The screen went black. "No!" Ellie screamed, diving for the computer. The man grabbed her by the arm and hauled her back. "That's enough, miss. The show's over." A moment later, the silhouette of Marcus Vane appeared in the broken doorway. He stepped over the shattered wood, adjusting his tie. He looked around the dark room, smelling the ozone and desperation. "Pathetic," Vane sneered. "Bouncing a signal off a car? Really, Sterling? That's the best you had?" Vane walked over to the smashed laptop on the floor. He crushed the USB drive under his expensive heel. "It's 8:55 a.m., Vane checked his watch. "In 5 minutes, the banks initiate the seizure. In 35 minutes, the market opens, and since you have no servers and no logistics network, Thorn Dynamics will effectively cease to exist. The stock will open at 0. He looked at the mercenaries. "Escort Mr. Thorn and the waitress out of the building. Throw them on the curb." Sterling struggled against the guard holding him. He looked at Ellie. She was pale, trembling, staring at the broken laptop. The upload had cut off at 99%. It wasn't enough. The mesh network needed 100% saturation to initiate the handshake protocol. They had failed by 1%. "I'm sorry," Sterling whispered to her. "I'm so sorry." The guards dragged them out. They were marched down the hallway, past the staring employees who knew the end was coming, down the freight elevator, and shoved out the back exit into the rainy alleyway behind the skyscraper. The heavy metal door slammed shut behind them. Locked, Ellie and Sterling stood in the rain, soaking wet, defeated. The dumpster next to them smelled of rotting garbage. It was a fitting end. Sterling leaned against the brick wall and slid down until he was sitting on the wet pavement. He put his head in his hands. "My father built that company from a single truck, and I lost it to a shark in a suit." Ellie stood still, the rain plastering her hair to her face. She was breathing hard. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. It was cracked, but it still worked. "What time is it?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Does it matter?" Sterling groaned. "Sterling, look at the time." He looked up. "It's 9:31 a.m. The market just opened. Why do you want to watch the execution?" Ellie was staring at her phone screen. Her thumb was trembling. "Because, look at the volume." Sterling frowned. He pulled his own phone out of his wet pocket. He opened the finance app. He expected to see a flat line, a generated error message. Instead, he saw a green arrow, a vertical green arrow. "Thrun, 2850 to 210%. "What?" Sterling gasped. He refreshed the screen. Thorn, 32, 35, 10. It's climbing, Ellie whispered. It's exploding. How? Sterling scrambled to his feet. The upload failed. We only hit 99%. Ellie looked at him, a slow, disbelief-filled smile spreading across her face. The virus behavior. The what? My father's code, she laughed, a hysterical, joyful sound. It was designed like a benign virus. It doesn't need 100% to start. It just needs a host. If it infects 99% of the trucks, those trucks will automatically search for the missing 1% and upload the data to them physically when they pass each other on the highway. She grabbed Sterling's lapels. The network is live, Sterling. The trucks are talking to each other. And because Vane cut the central server, the market sees it as the first, fully decentralized, unhackable logistics grid in history. You didn't just save the company, you changed the entire industry. Sterling stared at the numbers. The stock hit $40. They were safe. The hostile takeover was mathematically impossible. Suddenly, the heavy metal door behind them flew open. It wasn't the guards this time. It was Sarah, Sterling's assistant, and she was crying. Mr. Thorne, you have to come inside. It's the news, it's everywhere. They ran back inside, ignoring the confused security guards. They sprinted to the lobby where a massive TV screen was broadcasting CNBC. The headline ticker read, Vane Corp under FBI investigation. On the screen, a reporter was standing in front of the Vane Corp tower across the street. In a shocking turn of events, the reporter said, audio recordings have been leaking onto the public internet for the last 10 minutes. The source appears to be the CB radio frequencies of thousands of Thorn Dynamics trucks, which are broadcasting a looped recording on repeat. Sterling looked at Ellie. You recorded him? I told you, Ellie grinned. I needed access to the audio subsystem. When Vane was in the boardroom gloating about framing my father and sabotaging your servers, I recorded every word through the conference mic, and I embedded the audio file into the update. On the TV, the audio played. It was scratchy, but unmistakable. It was Marcus Vane's voice. It's only illegal if you lose. Little Eleanor Vance, the code you just wrote is based on proprietary architecture your father stole. The reporter continued. The recording not only implicates Marcus Vane in corporate sabotage today, but also reopens the 10-year-old case regarding Robert Vance. Federal agents are currently entering the building. Through the glass walls of the lobby, Sterling and Ellie watched as FBI agents swarmed the building across the street. Minutes later, Marcus Vane was led out in handcuffs, his silver hair disheveled, shielding his face from the cameras. The lobby of Thorn Dynamics erupted in cheers. Employees who thought they were fired were hugging each other. Sterling turned to Ellie. The noise of the celebration faded into the background. He reached into his wet jacket pocket and pulled out a soggy, crumbling piece of paper, the napkin from Sal's diner. You did the impossible, Sterling said, his voice thick with emotion. You saved the company. You cleared your father's name, and you took down the man who destroyed both our families. He smoothed the napkin out. I made a promise. Half my shares. $100 million. Ellie looked at the napkin. She looked at the lobby full of people who kept their jobs because of her math. She looked at Sterling, the man who had mocked her, fought with her, and trusted her when it mattered. She took the napkin, and she tore it in half. Sterling's eyes widened. Ellie, what are you doing? I don't want your money, Sterling, she said, dropping the wet paper into a trash can. I did this for my dad. He's finally at peace. She turned to walk away, back toward the door, back toward her life as a waitress. She was tired. She just wanted to sleep. Ellie, wait! Sterling ran after her, catching her hand just before she reached the revolving doors. You can't just leave, he said, breathless. You're the smartest person I've ever met. You're the only reason this place is standing. I can't run this without you. I'm just a waitress, Ellie smiled sadly. No. Sterling shook his head firmly. You were never just a waitress. You were a CEO in hiding. He got down on one knee. The lobby went silent again. People gasped. Was he proposing? Sterling reached into his pocket, but instead of a ring, he pulled out his security badge, the black all-access card that only the CEO carried. I don't want to be the CEO anymore, Sterling said. I'm good at talking to banks, but I'm not the visionary. You are. He held the badge out to her. Eleanor Vance, I am formally offering you the position of Chief Executive Officer of Thorn Dynamics, plus the equity, plus the salary, and I will serve as your chairman of the board. Ellie looked at the badge. She looked at the reflection of herself in the glass door. Wet hair, cheap thrift store blazer, tired eyes. But behind those eyes was the mind that had just outsmarted Wall Street. She took the badge. On one condition, she said. Sterling stood up, grinning. Name it. We changed the coffee in the break room, she said. It's terrible. Sterling laughed, a sound of pure relief. Deal. 1 year later. The cover of Forbes magazine sat on the table of Sal's 24-hour diner. The headline read, The Queen of Logistics, How Eleanor Vance Revolutionized the Global Supply Chain. Ellie sat in her old booth, wearing a tailored white suit. Sterling sat across from her, pouring champagne into 2 mugs. To the napkin, Sterling toasted. To the math, Ellie corrected, clinking her mug against his. Outside, a Thorn Dynamics truck rumbled past, moving efficiently, part of a living network that pulsed with the heartbeat of a waitress who refused to give up. And that is the incredible story of how a simple coffee stain turned into $100 million empire. It proves that intelligence and grit can come from the most unexpected places, and that you should never, ever judge someone by the apron they wear. Sterling Thorn learned that lesson the hard way, but in the end, it saved his life. What would you have done if you were Ellie? Would you have taken the money and walked away, or would you have stayed to run the company? Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this story of justice, revenge, and impossible odds, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next drama. We have a story coming up next week about a homeless veteran who is denied entry to a hotel he actually owns. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching.